Alright, this is the second exercise video demonstrating the movement principle I call bowing. If you haven't seen the one for the buoy, I'd recommend going to see that one first. We're still going to review that one a little bit before doing this one, just because it's kind of a fundamental prerequisite, if you will. So, again, the buoy exercise is basically just trying to find a neutral position in the spine and train yourself to move up and down, primarily using strength from the legs, and training yourself so that when you generate that strength, it doesn't build up any patterns of tension that would result from leaning forward or back. Yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm pushing through the feet, push my head upwards, and just trying to find that middle position where I have the least discomfort, or it just feels good as far as how things are resting in the back. And what I want to do now, the key component of the bowing exercise, or that movement principle, is that I want to maintain this level of comfort while I start to change the orientation of my body. So the bowing, forward and back, I'm going to breathe in with the buoy, and then I'm going to slowly start to soften the front of my body. That's going to put me at a little bit of a forward lean. The primary component, though, is that I don't want to bend down. I want to keep my head as tall as possible and let this soft space in front of me kind of give and still feel very large at the same time. I don't want to shrink and move down into it. Imagine that there's something very large in front of you, just growing into you and moving your whole body back. At a certain point, what's going to happen is that if your hips start moving back, you're going to feel your back muscles engage, or maybe your glutes, your hamstrings, anything along this whole area. And when you do, that's your end range of motion. What you want to do from there is keep that muscle activity and use them to pull yourself slowly into the neutral position. So I'm breathing in, basically doing another buoy exercise here in the middle. And then as I breathe out, I'm going to bend back. And again, I want to imagine that there's a large object behind me, which is rolling and creating the space. And again, you want to imagine that shape is large so that you don't accidentally bend back on it, because that's going to compress some of the vertebrae as well. So again, you want to have a very large supportive feeling at the back as you hollow out the space with the lumbar curve. And then the rest of the body. Bring the weight slightly onto the toes. And then as you breathe out, keep that orientation and bring it back to the neutral position. One thing that you can do is, if you have a mirror or a second set of eyes, another person looking at you, or even a video, good thing to look for is the quality of not bringing your head, not lowering the head, and not bringing it forward too much. So as I'm doing this exercise, you don't have to do a lot of range of motion. The primary component comes from moving the hips back, and you'll get that most with very subtle movements. As long as you try to keep your head over your base of support, you'll be able to get this sensation. So again, as I move my hips back, I'm trying to keep my head tall, but you'll notice that I'm not bringing my head in front of my feet. It's still fairly right over them. And then the same thing, I'm going to come back to the middle position, breathe in, and again, you don't want to hyperextend the already extended curves in your spine during the second movement. So I don't want to hyperextend the neck and do this to initiate the movement. I don't want to hyperextend the back, and basically if you keep the tailbone high, that's one way to exaggerate it, and then hyperextend the back. Those are already extended, and again, if you initiate from that, it'll probably feel uncomfortable if you do that. So one thing that you can do is let the movement initiate from even the hamstrings. Just soften the hamstrings and just let them move forward. Let the heels come up. Everything else, again, for the bowing is fairly still, and you're not interrupting the natural curve or comfort that you have from the neutral position. So again, I'm breathing in, and all I want to do is just change my orientation. Breathing out. Everyone has different levels of flexibility. You can do this with your knees bent. If you want to try to test your range of motion a little bit more and just engage the legs, if you want a little more strength in that area, you can do that, but it's not necessary. I'm also using my hands. If you have any discomfort while you're figuring this out, you can use your thighs as a guide. So what I'm doing here on the way down is I can let my hands support myself on my legs and thighs as I bend the knees. Again, I'm not bending forward, I'm not bringing myself in front of my feet. I'm letting the shoulders stay over the wrists. It's a primary component of this. If you're going to use your hands for support and keep the muscles engaged, you don't want to lean forward. That'll probably just not feel so comfortable on the wrists if you need your hands for support. Similarly, as I'm going back, I want to engage it by lifting the heels and moving the hamstrings forward. I can bring my shoulder blades together, and I can let my hands support myself on my hamstrings. If you're looking to test your range of motion a little bit, again, generally the hips are the tightest area on people doing a lot of computer work, sitting, anything like that. So that's why I have this area with a lot of focus. Also, these large muscles are much more resilient to stress. The muscles and the tendons, they repair a lot faster than if you start giving yourself just bone on bone with going too aggressive with things around the waist. So, and I'm going back this way. I can let my hands track down my hamstrings as I move my hips forward. That'll just help assure that I'm protecting the back, and even engaging some large muscle groups will also help too. So what you can do is you can squeeze the shoulder blades till you feel a little bit of pressure in the lats or the rhomboid area anywhere. Also the glutes. If you feel any compression at the low back area, generally recommend people tighten up their glutes and actively hold them forcefully, and that will draw the stress and activity from the vertebrae down into the hips a little bit. So you can keep the glutes squeezed as you're doing this part of the movement. And then again, once you feel the activity on the opposite side, press through the feet, keep the head tall, and then come back into the neutral position. I think just one more thing I want to mention is that I always come back to the neutral position when I'm first showing people these exercises, because you want to train the body not to build up tension or a pattern of tension on both sides of the body, front and back. Because if you have tension on one side, tension on the other, both of those shorten at the same time, what that's going to lead to is shortening of the trunk and compression of the discs. So as somebody who practices these exercises more, if they just have natural flexibility, where circulation is good, they may not have these problems. But just as far as posting videos online, I usually just put that out there first, is that come back to the neutral position. And what that's also going to do is it's going to also help you train these foundation principles and integrate them into just daily life. So most of the exercises that people do, they aren't very functional or not very common things outside of the gym, for example. So if you can take all of these muscle activities, this range of motion, and then learn how to bring yourself back to a neutral position, it trains your motor plan so that it doesn't have to switch gears when you're in exercise mode and then when you're in daily life mode. So I hope this helps. I'm going to be posting the third video, which is bending. I'm going to start to increase the difficulty a little bit as far as coordination, balance, and engaging the arms and legs with the exercises too.